Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. We are about to start and we're just letting participants in. So if you will bear with us for a few seconds, we will get started very shortly. In fact, I would say right now, in the interest of time. So nice to see so many people joining this webinar. Thank you so much for joining today. We're really looking forward to this opportunity to together go on a learning journey around innovative financing for water security through an IWRM approach. This learning journey, which will last 4 months, will be interesting, stimulating, rewarding, we hope, for all of you. So we're very much looking forward to kicking it off with this webinar today. This webinar is very much part of the SDG 6 Global Acceleration Framework led by UN Water and its accelerator on financing in particular. My name is Colin Heron, and I'm the Senior Water Resources Management Specialist on water solutions for the SDGs at the Global Water Partnership in Stockholm. To get us started, I want to first go through some house rules to make sure that everyone is clear on how this webinar will be run. We have interpretation in French available for all participants. Please click on the interpretation icon, which you should see at the bottom of your screen. Hopefully there you've all now got the right language. All participants will be muted during the plenary. The only ones that will be able to speak are the designated speakers. Therefore, if you have any questions, and we hope you do, please use the chat function, which you will see at the bottom of your screen. We will try in the session to answer as many questions as possible. But of course, this is a learning journey. We will have lots of opportunities as well to continue the conversation, including on the community of practice straight after this webinar. And if you have any difficulties with your audio, please write to Mario, who is our tech host, in the chat. So next, I want to walk us through the program for today. We will have some opening remarks from Dario Soto-Abril and an opening presentation on the topic. Then we will get to 3 experts giving their opinion and their perspective on this essential topic from 3 very different sets of experience. And we hope that this will be a dialogue between the experts and with all of you. So please make sure that you're thinking of your questions that you would like to ask the experts during the plenary. And then in the interactive breakout rooms, we will have 25 minutes in which we will break into 3 different groups, and all of you can ask questions, can share experiences, or just give a perspective on the topic. Then finally, the last 10 minutes will be devoted to closing, and we will have a little bit of explanation about this community of practice. So with that, next is a brief icebreaker. So you've heard who I am, but now we want to know who you are. So with that, if you could go to polev.com/GWP. I believe the address is being put in the chat box right now. Yes, find where you are on the map. And we want to see the spread of the different regions of the world who are hopefully joining us for this call today. Okay, I can see we have, as one might have expected, a lot of participants from Europe, from Northern Europe in particular, Northern and Western Europe. We have some joining from the Middle East region, Northern Africa popping up. We see Indonesia there on the map, Southeast Asia as well. Okay, now we have a lot of participants joining now from Europe, as one might expect from the time zone. Also from Eastern and Southern Africa. That's great to see. A little bit of Western Africa there as well. So we have, well, first, a good number of participants, and secondly, a pretty good geographical spread. So this is very nice to see. So now if we go on to the second question on the POLEV, as I mentioned, this is going to be a learning journey. And on this journey, we will take on different stops in which we will discuss different aspects of financing for water security. We would like to ask you to select up to 3 different topics that you would like this learning journey to focus on. So you can see 13 different options on the screen. All of them have been taken from literature about the topic, and all of them are relevant, but we would like to know which of them you, as the participants in this learning journey, find most relevant. So we will sum up the results of this vote, plus this afternoon we have a second webinar. So we will add up the totals of the 2, and the top 7, I believe, are the ones that we will be taking. The 3 T's are tariffs, taxes, and transfers. This is an OECD definition. And if you want to know more, then I suggest you choose that option H. So I think I can still see a lot of movement in the voting, which is good. That means that the technology is on our side, which is always a good start for a webinar. But with that, I think we do have to move on. So I would like to take the opportunity to now introduce our CEO and Darío Soto-Abril, the CEO and Secretary General of the Global Water Partnership, who will now formally open this webinar. Darío, over to you.
Thank you very much, Colin, and good morning to all of you colleagues joining from around the world. On behalf of the Global Water Partnership and the SDG IWRM Support Program, I want to welcome again all of you to this activity. Since 2017, GWP, the Global Water Partnership, has partnered with the United Nations Environmental Program, UNEP, as you might know, UNEP DHI Center, and CAPNet through the SDG IWRM Support Program, which is the one that has us here today. The program assists countries in monitoring and accelerating progress towards their water-related sustainable development goals, our famous SDGs. The support program used the SDG 6.5 monitoring process as a 3-year status check on the world's progress towards implementing IWRM. The support program also assists countries in advancing towards their own national targets. Now, one of the biggest challenges in achieving SDGs 6.51 and 6 in general is the insufficient level of available finance. That's why we are all here, and probably you all know more than I how the challenge translates in real life. Delivering indeed on sustainable water management will cost around 1.2% of the global GDP. Now, that being said, doing nothing, of course, is never an option, considering that many regions may experience up to 6% decline in GWP by 2050. This due to increased water scarcity. We're seeing that already in many regions in South America and Africa. Accordingly, investments need to flow into water sooner rather than later. And with that, today is the starting point of the learning journey on innovative financing for water security through the IWRM approach. I'm sure, and I hope you guys agree with me, that we all can solve the finance challenge only by learning from each other, sharing experiences and best practices, and promising innovative approaches that we can share with each other. In this journey, we have the honor to welcome distinguished experts to share their insights and to discuss with us in the next 90 minutes and afterwards in the SDG 6 IWRM community. With that, I would like to declare this learning journey formally open. I look forward to many inspiring inputs from all of you coming from all over the world. Thank you very much and enjoy this journey. Thank you, Colin.
Thank you so much, Dario, for those warm, welcoming words to all of our participants. So now with the tone set, I would like to hand over to my good friend and colleague, Maya Bertule from UNEP DHI Center for Water and Environment, who will give us a brief presentation on the topic that we are discussing today. So Maya, over to you. You have 7 minutes, please.
Great. Thank you so much, Colin and colleagues. And it is really a pleasure to be here kicking off this exciting learning journey. I will spend a few minutes talking about the Global Sustainable Development Goal Indicator 6.5.1 on degree of implementation of IWRM. And my focus will be specifically on the financing aspects. So what we see from the global reporting on this indicator. I'm with the UNEP DHI Center. We've partnered with GWP and UNEP for a while in supporting countries both on reporting on the indicator and supporting implementation. Next slide, please. So global reporting on indicator 651 takes place roughly every 3 years. So far, we have had 2 reporting rounds, the first one being in 2017 and the latest round on reporting in 2020. And for both years, we had more than 70 countries reporting on indicators. So the results we see are based on quite a broad set of data sets from the countries. So you can see the map at the background here. Next slide, please. For those of you who are not so familiar with the indicator 651 on degree of implementation of IWRM, it is based on a survey questionnaire. So all countries using stakeholder consultations in many cases collect their responses on where they stand on 33 different aspects of IWRM implementation. And the survey is organized across 4 dimensions of IWRM, one of these dimensions being financing. And financing status of implementation is assessed using 6 different questions that addresses both national and subnational aspects of both budgets, but also revenue raising for IWRM implementation specifically. And this is where we'll have a closer look at. Next slide, please. As you can see on the map here, this is the overall indicator status. So this is the global status on indicator 651 from 2020. And indicator 651 is measured on a scale of 0 to 100, 100 being very high degree of implementation of IWRM. As you can see, the global average score for indicator is 54% out of 100, so just at medium high. If we move to the next slide, we can see the 33 questions. So diving a little deeper in the detail of what is behind this average global score. And as you can see on the top here, all the questions relating to financing are for both years, actually for 2017 and 2020, in the lower end of scoring. So what we see is that consistently the aspects relating to financing for IWRM are scoring the lowest, and this includes both budgets at subnational level, budgets at national level, and also transboundary financing. Next slide, please. So the question, of course, is improved financing only representing a need for more funding? And this definitely comes out as a strong indication from most of the country reports. And here we're talking both about the positive examples, so countries that have achieved quite high degree of implementation of IWRM, but also at the challenges that countries list in their both submissions, but also stakeholder consultation reports. Next, please. But what we see also from the positive and the negative examples and the challenges is that improved financing is, of course, the need for more funding, but there are many other ways that financing for IWRM can be moved ahead if we are moving towards the target set for 2030. And this, of course, includes improved management of the existing funds, so not necessarily even though necessary, but also managing the existing funds better to make sure that there is in fact dedicated financing for activities that support implementation of IWRM. We also see that a key challenge has been the capacity. So there is a need to improve capacity to absorb and disperse the funds where they are available, and also better and broader revenue raising mechanisms. So making sure that there are mechanisms in place that can help to raise the funding that's necessary for implementing IWRM activities specifically. Two other things I wanted to highlight is improved accounting. So making sure there is transparent accounting of how the funds are dispersed, and also advocacy. So making sure that the need for IWRM and the need for financing specifically for IWRM is clear at the higher levels of decision making and policy making. And of course, in the nature of integrated water resources management, we see that addressing coordination of finance and planning of budgets and finance across the different water challenges, but also across the sectors is really key for improving the overall financing for IWRM. And holding all that together, legal and regulatory frameworks that actually support budget allocations, revenue raising, distribution of financing for IWRM are really key. Next slide, please. So just summarizing that, these are a few of the supporting actions that the countries have identified and the global results have shown that would help us collectively and also on a country basis move ahead on better financing for IWRM. As I mentioned, of course, increasing the direct investment on national, subnational level that is backed by good policy that acknowledges the need and relevance of IWRM. Raising revenue both from traditional but also non-traditional water and ecosystem services. Very importantly, also transparency, anti-corruption, accountability, not only in collection of fees, but also on distribution of the funds for IWRM activities. At the time where we are now, a number of countries have identified opportunities for leveraging support to IWRM from the support packages. This includes COVID-19 support packages, also funding related to natural disasters where there are synergies with activities in IWRM. And as I mentioned, also, of course, improving coordination and prioritization of funds across sectors. And in many cases, they are including win-win investments. And just an immediate example, of course, is climate change adaptation, poverty reduction actions where there are clear win-win opportunities for win-win investments with IWRM funding. And in the same vein, increasing and improving investments from donors and banks on the same. Next slide, please. More details on these global results from Indicator 651 are available, of course, in the global and the regional reports. A few links are here. I hope colleagues can also help to throw these in the chat. With that, I'll say thank you again for the opportunity to present. Always happy to answer to any questions relating to the Indicator 651, and I'm looking forward to a lively discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maya. That is an excellent framing of this discussion today, and to go deeper into the relevant topic of financing, and we will discuss whether it's financing for IWRM or financing for water security, and even if that debate is relevant, with our three experts. So this is the part where we would like to present then the three experts who we have with us today. First, we have Helen Lobenstein, who's with an environmental economist in the OECD's water team in the Environment Directorate. She has been coordinating the OECD's regional and thematic roundtable meetings on financing water over the last 2 years. And she's one of the main authors of the recent publication on financing a water secure future. Our second expert is Phil Riddle, who is a well-known international researcher and advisor on water policy and sector investment strategy, with almost 45 years of extensive experience gained around the world, especially in irrigated agriculture and natural resources sectors. Our third expert is Guy Alaitz, who has been a principal water resources specialist and a program leader at the World Bank. He's also worked on national water sector reforms in East Asia and Central and Southern Europe, and he's currently Professor Emeritus of Knowledge and Capacity Development at IHE Delft Institute for Water Education. So with these three wonderful experts, we have some questions prepared to get the three of you talking. And what we will do in this panel is we will ask you that opening question, and I will give you 3 minutes each to respond. And then we'll follow up with some other questions. So I would like to invite the audience to think about your questions and to put them in the chat in Zoom, and we will get to them during this panel, hopefully, as many as we can. And any questions that we don't answer in this session, we will answer afterwards in the community of practice. So the first question for our three panelists is, what do you consider the key to unlocking financing for water security through an IWRM approach? And first, I'd like to ask that question to Helen, then Phil, and then Guy. So Helen, over to you, please.
Yes, thank you. I hope you can all hear me well. And thanks for the kind introduction and also the very nice ice-breaking opening of the session. I really like that one. And yeah, I'm very happy to be here today and to kick off this important learning journey on financing integrated water resource management. And in my work in the OECD's team on water finance, one of the recurrent issues that we hear during our work with countries and regions and key partners is that financing is one of the key hurdles for achieving water security. And also, we also heard it in the welcoming speech, the huge financing gap persists in this sector. For example, the global cost for achieving SDG 6 is estimated to exceed $1 trillion per year. And one of the often cited barriers to water finance is the challenge to quantify and monetize the range of benefits that accrue from investments in water security. Access to water and water security are public goods, and hence it is challenging to give it a price. However, what could be a good entry point or angle is to look at the costs of the lack of water security. Estimates on that suggest sums of $260 billion of global economic losses from inadequate water supply and sanitation, or $94 billion per year of economic loss from water security to existing irrigators. Another estimate that features in our OECD publication, Financing of Water's Secure Future, that was released in March, that is based on a CDP survey on water, is the following. Over 2,900 private companies assess their business value at risk of water-related detrimental impacts, which totals to over $33 billion now and in the near future. And looking at those costs and potential risks coming from a lack of water security, not only on private companies, but also across different sectors. And I think this pandemic has shown how intertwined sectors are, how supply chains are interconnected, food markets, etc. And looking at the impacts of water-related risks on the broader economy and also the financial system provides an angle and an additional argument to channel financing flows to water security. And it stresses the importance of an integrated approach to water resource management. And hence, what I consider a key point, like one of the key points to unlock finance for water security, is to properly assess those water-related risks on the level of companies, of countries, of financial sector. And that includes not only to look at the impacts of water risks, but also at the impacts of an economic activity on the water resource, on its availability, on its quality, because through their use of water resources, companies and any other actor create additional pressure on the resource and thus have an impact on the level of water security for other users. When I talk about other users, I also mean the environment and nature. And here are also topics that come with it, disclosure requirements, taxonomies, and these current developments that should be looked at in this context. So this water risk angle could help to manage water resources in a more integrated way and to unlock financing flows for integrated water resource management. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that, Helen. And yes, the risks and opportunities, I think, are key here, and both of action and of inaction. Very interesting perspective. I'd now like to ask the same question to you, Phil, and if you can also react a little bit to what you've just heard from Helen. So what do you consider the key to unlocking financing for water security through an IWRM approach?
Well, key is addressing the smorgasbord of problems that we face in the world of sector financing. But as Helen, I'd like to thank you for this opportunity. Sector financing is what gets me out of bed in the morning. It's very exciting, but very challenging. Let me also say that practically my entire career has been spent in emerging markets, not in developed countries. So the key to unlocking financing is to address at least some of the following problems. At a high-level meeting of the African Development Bank in 2016, development partners in the room said water is crucially important, but it's too hard. A country representative said also we could have a lot more financial discipline in water financing. But the too hard problem arises because water has huge political implications, and reform of the sector is seen as politically expensive, and development partners frankly have easier things to spend their money on. Client governments therefore need to remove water from politics and from political territory, both domestic and, in the case of transboundary issues, to stop blaming riparians for domestic problems. An excuse not to invest. So, for instance, the Nile upstream riparians need to stop blaming Egypt for their own water problems. Egypt has some of the highest productivity of water use in the world, and the countries that are complaining have some of the lowest water productivity in the world. So no excuses, please. But the development partners create difficulties themselves. Sometimes their aid cycles don't always keep pace with client countries. Development partners also can have opposing policies. When I was an advisor to the government of Vietnam, the World Bank and the Asian Development came along, both offering $500 million for water sector reform with totally opposite conditionalities. The World Bank said, we don't want an apex body in the sector for several years. And if you put one in, we will not lend you the money. And the Asian Development Bank said, we insist on you putting an apex body in. Without that, we won't give you the money. So that's a problem. Also more horrifying is development partners sometimes compete for territory and influence by outbidding other donors. I was working in India, in Chhattisgarh, on a joint study for the ADB and the World Bank. But the ADB said privately, when we get to investment downstream of this study, we will outbid the world money and then they can. That doesn't help anybody because there's no consideration as to what the money is going to go on. And also, it would be a great deal easier if development partners were happier with sector budget support modalities. There are significant reductions in overheads, especially with respect to monitoring and evaluation. Another problem with the development partners is a lack of courage. I led a study for the World Bank some years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, specifically on how to finance the management of a water resource, not infrastructure, but how to manage the watersheds, how to make sure water is plentiful and available. And we came up with all sorts of innovative solutions, even green bonds. I saw that on one of the slides earlier. When we suggested green bonds, the World Bank said, don't be silly. A lack of courage. It ended up simply with an extra tariff, on an extra levy on the water tariff. But what is exciting is when I was working in Egypt more recently, working with the Minister of Agriculture, Minister of Water, we showed him that it's more economically advantageous to borrow money at high street rates from local banks and go it alone than take a soft loan from a development partner, which had to be spent on tied aid. Now, that was quite a radical, innovative approach, and the minister took our advice and borrowed the money on the high street, and the donor went home with their tail between their legs. And finally, there may be the option to improve the performance of existing investments. An earlier comment also spoke along those lines. This may be achieved not by more investment, but by improved water governance. But that's a big subject, and we don't have time for that one today. But we can get there without massive investment, at least some of the way. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for that, Phil. A lot to unpack there, many challenges identified, some of which I hope that we will go deeper into during this learning journey, and some of which are, I would say, societal challenges, which are very difficult to get to, fundamental challenges, I would say. But if any of you are interested, of course, in going deeper into some of those topics, you're welcome to join the breakout group with Phil afterwards as well. But now turning to Guy, in just 3 minutes, please, Guy, could I please ask you for your perspective on this key topic of unlocking financing for water security?
Yes, thank you, Colin. Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you for having me with you. I have actually 3 points, Colin. Point number 1 is a sense of urgency. We look at massive investments, massive needs. We see that over the past 2 decades, developing countries on average have only met 30 to maybe 50% of the needs. And even in the EU countries, across the EU countries, that was only 50 to 90% of the needs that have been covered. And looking forward, we see that government budgets are going to be further squeezed because of so many demands, health, education, etc. So the need to partner with private capital is not a choice. It is inescapable. Point number 2, it's not a water manager that is important, it's the water organization. The river basin organization, the water utility, the watershed board, the local government, municipality, district, and they have to be creditworthy. If we want to rope in private capital, that means that the water organization must be creditworthy. That means there must be a revenue stream and cash flow. There must be good governance. There must be a regular business-based auditing. That is different from the accountability, but it's the auditing system. And risk must be identified and managed properly. So these are key elements. And the third key is that we need to also develop more intermediary institutions. We have a couple of them. In the Netherlands, for example, the Netherlands Water Bank. In Belgium, you have Aquafin. In Germany, KfW. In the US, you have US EPA. So these are intermediaries that operate between the water sector and the financial sector, because these two sectors, they don't understand each other, so they don't talk the same language. And so these are small organizations that help to structure, package the financial instruments and the demand, and they generally have also the possibility to rope in also some seed money, some public money, so they can indeed go to a blending arrangement. So these are 3 key conditions. The good news is that IWRM is a very important instrument to strengthen the business case of proposals. So that's what I would like to share.
Thank you so much for that, Guy. And the water sector and the finance sector speaking different languages is a key concern, and we need interpreters that will bring the 2 languages in sync. That's one of the many challenges that the 3 experts have highlighted so far. And of course, there are many directions this could go in, but I wanted to hone in on one for you, Phil. I'd like to ask, what advice would you give water managers who are looking to increase water sector investments? Since we heard earlier that in reporting on SDG 6.5.1, this is one of the major concerns for water managers at the national level. Phil, if you can answer in just 2 minutes, please.
Okay, nexus infrastructure. One investment, several benefit streams. Water is not locked into a single sector and does not create unnecessary scarcity in others. Blended finance. We already heard from Guy about blended finance to render private sector investments more attractive. Simple revenue guarantees, cheap capital to commercial financial service providers. There are risks attached with leverage loan indemnity. And what is interesting is there is significant development partner interest in blended finance. Also robust cost recovery, user pays principles, and appropriate, and more important, appropriate recycling of the proceedings back into the sector at the appropriate level. Because numerous studies have shown that users are more willing to pay than governments are to charge. There's lots of options: volumetric service charges, which is sometimes confused with the price of water, which it absolutely is not. Land tax in the way of irrigation can include a levy for the service provision. Property tax in the case of water supply and sanitation. There are participatory processes that can be mobilized to increase revenue collection. What is very, very important, however, if you service charges, is you have to make absolutely sure that the resulting finance, for instance, in India, it is simply a tax, and very little of it goes back to the sector. The other thing is the ownership of the resulting funds. In Bangladesh, the water levy is owned by the water user associations, and as long as it is enough to pay the service charge, they can do what they like with the rest. And that is indeed also the case in Vietnam. So that's it really: blended finance, robust cost recovery, and nexus infrastructure. Thanks.
That's wonderful, Phil. Thanks so much for that. And just for the interpreter's benefit, maybe if you could slow down a little bit for the next question, if that's okay. But no, thanks for those perspectives. And I think the many challenges which we are highlighting here, and I'll draw on some of them at the end. But for now, I want to turn to Guy. In your regular activities, I know that you work to increase the capacity of water experts to access financing. And I wanted to ask if you have any advice for how water experts can increase their ability to attract financing for water, and perhaps overcoming this challenge of being lost in translation.
Right. Yeah, that's indeed a challenge, and I very much value your initiative here, because it's essentially my view that we have an intensive community of practice, sharing experiences, because each country has its own story and question, and so we can learn from each other across the world. That said, I would certainly recommend that we take a fresh look at how to increase the skills of water managers regarding financial management, but also business management. You know, they have, at some point, they may become manager of their utility or the irrigation department or whatever, and they have to understand how they should organize their shop and how they should be, accountable to the financial markets and to their superiors, of course, and the public, in order to attract this private capital. That means also understanding better how to prepare bankable proposals. And we see that, it was already mentioned before, the absorption of funds is lagging, and that's to a large extent because the water experts don't know how to formulate ones that are, that make sense. It's often a matter of common sense. And on the other hand, policymakers, I think there's a large agenda ahead of us to create an enabling environment. So the financial regulators, plenty of countries do not allow the pension funds, for example, to invest in water projects. The water regulators, because they may be too reluctant to allow for cost recovery that would attract private capital. Possibilities to merge public with private capital. So there's a lot of work ahead to be done. So here we can do a lot of capacity development, at all levels.
Thanks so much for that, Guy. And both Guy and Phil have just mentioned blended financing, and obviously blending requires skillful management. So I wanted to ask Helen if from the OECD's work, if you have any best practices that you've observed on getting that mix right when bringing together diverse funding sources for water security.
Yeah, I think that is a very good question, because we should not only talk about where to get different funding sources from, but also we need to think about what is the right mix of those funding sources, and also right strategy to use those funds. And the debate is often around how to get more funding, but what it should also be about is how to spend funds better, to make sure that the funds are spent efficiently. And that's something that Maya already mentioned in her presentation at the beginning of the session. Also, Phil raised this point. And now we talked about already a lot about blended finance, and which is the strategic use of certain funds, development funds or other public funds, to unlock additional finance, normally commercial finance. And a good way to spend those funds is to strategically address barriers of finance to the water sector. And some of those barriers are perceived high investment risks in the sector. So one example is to use public funds to de-risk investments, for example, through guarantees, credit enhancement facilities. And I can name some examples. There's the Philippine Water Revolving Fund, the Climate Investiture from the Dutch Fund of Climate or Development. Another example are collective investment vehicles or pooling mechanisms that help to overcome the challenge of small ticket sizes that we often see in the water sector, and that is then also associated with high transaction costs. And here examples are water funds developed by the Nature Conservancy. So another point that was already raised was investments in technical assistance, like the strategic use of public budgets for technical assistance or capacity building that we just mentioned. And then in our recent report that I mentioned earlier, but also throughout our last roundtable meetings over the last years, we document those specific examples and case examples of innovative financing mechanisms that actually address those barriers. And maybe a last point that I just want to stress as well is we also identify the need of those intermediary agencies that play a strategic role in bringing those different actors and funding sources together and to help facilitating those financing structures. And they can be banks, like specific banks, like was mentioned before, the Dutch Water Bank, but they can also be NGOs or other actors that help bringing together, just as was mentioned before, the demand side and the supply side of finance, because there's often a lack of understanding between those communities.
Thank you so much for that perspective, Helen. And I see we're getting some very interesting questions in through the chat, which are very relevant for this conversation. So I'd like to, well, first invite everyone to put your questions in the chat, and we will take as many of them as we can right now. In fact, I see we have, in fact, two very good questions already to get us started. One from Jeanne Fabre from Danone. And Helen, you mentioned the example of water funds as one that I know very well, and it works particularly well at the watershed level, focusing on nature-based solutions. But Jeanne's question is, what are the other potential financial vehicles that could support the financing of a blend of activities, and then have a differential financial flow and business cases? And I want to put this question together with the second one from Liz Bernhard from UNEP, and throw that to the panel to see how you react. And that question is, we've heard this water finance divide, and it seemed, and Phil, you mentioned that sometimes investment in water is not clear. It's not perhaps as bankable as other investment opportunities, but it's, I would argue, more essential than perhaps any other investment opportunity. So how can we best bridge that divide and bring these great conversations like the one we're having today beyond the water sector? By the way, I don't like the use of the word water sector. I prefer water community, because when we're talking about water, it's not just a single sector approach, really. It's the broad range of water users and water related activities. So bringing those two questions together, I'd like to throw those to the panel and see who would like to react first. And please just feel free to open your microphone, either Phil, Guy, or Helen. I see your hand raised.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for those interesting questions. And maybe to the first one, what are other financing mechanisms other than water funds? There's a wide range of examples, but it's true that often those financing solutions need to be context specific, case specific, and that makes it difficult to be scaled up. But there are different solutions. There are performance-based bonds, for example, that help where investors share the risk with public funds. There's an example in Washington, D.C. on a specific storm and stormwater runoff green infrastructure that has a performance-based financing component. Another example are resilience bonds that can help address, well, either flood risk or drought risks. And there, for example, insurance companies do have an interest in investing funds. And yeah, there's a wide range of innovative examples that can work, public-private partnerships, etc. But indeed, it's really about how to bring the communities together. Maybe here to make the transition to the next question. What can be done to bridge this divide? I think, first of all, conversations like this, like various roundtable meetings, etc., can be a good solution. On the other hand, maybe to come back what I mentioned before, what is actually important for the financing side is an understanding of those risks. They are maybe, well, they are interested also in the impact of an investment, but what they are really interested in are the investment risks, or also the risk return profiles of investments. So I think here what we need is a better understanding and also better methodology, better data on the impacts of water-related risks on investments, on the economy. And that could be a good entry point actually to loop in the finance community in this conversation.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Helen. And just to briefly mention that, yes, there's no single solution. There's no magic bullet. And as much as we might like some mystical donor to come in and give $1 trillion a year to water, that's not going to happen. So we will have to be very canny in how we put together different funding sources. Phil, please.
Yes, along the same lines, and also picking up Guy's point that the private sector has to get involved. My partner, Leanne, she's in the business and biodiversity team at IUCN headquarters, and she regularly engages with some of the world's biggest multinational companies concerned about sustainability. Everyone that she works with say water security is our biggest concern. Are we engaging with them in a robust enough fashion to mobilize finance? Is there a sort of model we could apply to this part of the financing community? Guy, perhaps you have some ideas.
That's a very good question, Phil. I don't think there is too much of there is enough of a systematic advocacy. And perhaps one nice output of your initiative, Colin, could be to have by the end of this year, a kind of an action plan. So which entities are we going to approach with what cases, with what arguments? And so there's a multitude of issues that we have to consider. We have to unpack a very complex matter. And just like water is very complicated in the sense that you have irrigation that's different from water supply in cities, flood management, etc. Also, the financial sector is very fragmented, very specialized, highly specialized, very many niches. And so I would say that, for example, one option would be to engage with allies. There are quite some financial actors, but also corporates, so companies that have ESG ambitions. So they want to do good on environments, was it social and governance, and they would like to put in some seed money that takes risk, right? So we have to find these allies and explore, deepen the business case there. The second one is that we should indeed also scare the hell out of the corporates and out of the financial world. Because it's not just climate change, it's also the massive change in land use that is creating significant risk in the midterm and in the long term to the sustainability, to the business case of companies themselves. You know, real estate, for example, so many investors invest in real estate, but if you have floods, you know, riverine floods or coastal floods, that is certainly a major headache, and that's not going to go away. So all sectors, all financial sectors are one way or another affected or at risk. So if we can quantify that and also provide examples on how to mitigate this risk, you know, what I can do, then there is a very good likelihood. What we see is that these companies are getting interested in water. You know, financial actors are not interested in water. It's too complicated for them. You know, energy, yes, perhaps. Energy is quite straightforward, and you have a good cost recovery, so the risks are manageable. Although nowadays I wouldn't repeat that sentence, you know, in the current conditions. Transportation, ditto, is fairly replicable. Risks are manageable. Water is a different animal. But we will have to do a lot of homework with them in order to build the right case and get their attention.
Thank you so much for that, Guy. And the panel is actually drawing to an end, and the time is, I mean, really going by very quickly. Unfortunately, the topics would allow for a much larger conversation, which, by the way, we hope we can have during the breakout groups. So I just want to pick up on a couple of quick points that were mentioned. First, the need for these translators, and that it's not a single translator that will be able to bring together the supply and the demand on every level. This has to be done in partnership, and it has to be done with a clear roadmap and action plan. And in fact, the SDG 6 IWRM support program, which has been mentioned today, is one means that we at GWP operate to support countries to have a better understanding of this particular roadmap and how they may advance, recognizing that, again, what works in country A may not necessarily work in country B, but at least if country B is aware of what country A is doing, then there's a good basis for analysis. So we are very much looking forward to, as a result of this learning journey, building on many of these insights that are being shared today, that have been shared so far, and that will be shared in the breakout sessions, which are our next part of the agenda. So with that, I'd like to, well, sincerely thank our three experts for these wonderful insights they provided so far. And I will now explain a little bit the dynamic of the breakout groups. So I hope that you've been listening, you've been taking notes and formulating your ideas, but this is now your opportunity to interact. And to do so, we will break into 3 different groups. In each of the breakout groups, we will have 25 minutes to discuss among you on the topic related to that group. You will see the topics and the names of the groups down below in the breakout section, which you can see on screen here. That will be facilitated very shortly. And this is a learning exchange. So we want to learn from you and for you to learn from others. I want to mention that we will be applying Chatham House rules, so please feel free to speak. We may quote, but we will not say who said what. And we will be working on a brief summary coming out from this, which will help to feed this ongoing effort to come up with these action plans that Guy has mentioned. So we will have one of the experts in each of the 3 rooms, a facilitator from GWP in each of these 3 rooms, and we hope that we will have many of you accompanying us in those 3 rooms. The plenary room, where Helen and myself will be, will have English-French interpretation. So if you require English-French interpretation, I would suggest that you stick to the main room, where we will discuss blending funding sources. In breakout group 1, we will have Phil and my colleague Sandra, who will discuss the topic of maximizing water investments. And in breakout group 2, we will have Guy and my colleague Laurent Charles, who will talk about water as an investment opportunity. So without further ado, I would like to invite you all to go through cyberspace to your breakout room, the breakout room of your choice. and we will be back in 25 minutes. Now to conclude the session today, I'd like to hand over to Sandra.
Yeah, thank you so much, Colin. And I'm trying to bring up my slides here again because we still have something to share with you, because this kickoff webinar has only been the beginning of our learning journey. And we would like to take you to a 4-month learning journey. So this learning journey on innovative financing for water security was kicked off today through this first online event, but we will also continue to do that in online discussions. We will invite you to also join our community of practice, because this whole learning journey will take place on our newly created SDG 6 IWRM community. And I will talk about that more in a second. So there we will have online discussions where we invite members to share experiences on the topic, share resources, case studies, but then also to just exchange with participants on what worked, what didn't work, etc. We will also have, as a continuation, other online events. So not only this kickoff webinar, but we will periodically have other online events dedicated to one theme, dedicated to a region, etc. To hear practical examples also, and to learn again from experts and interact with peers. We will also offer live chat with experts. You already got a bit of a glimpse of that in the breakout groups, and we are very happy that our 3 experts will also be available for a live chat right after this event on the COP. And of course, in this learning journey, you will also have networking opportunities. So by joining the COP, you can actually also chat with your peers, you can connect with peers and really broaden your network and your available resources in your daily work. So this learning journey will take place over the next 4 months from June until September, and you're warmly invited to join that. As said, it is hosted on the on the SDG 6 IWRM Community of Practice. And this community of practice is really a community for IWRM practitioners from all over the world. And it has as its objectives, it wants to kind of like enable the learning and sharing of participants and members amongst each other. So learning from experiences, sharing knowledge, sharing also news on the from the subnational to the global levels on challenges and opportunities of IWRM implementation, including financing, but also other topics, of course. Then we also want to enable the fostering of partnership and relationship building through this community of practice, and activate learning opportunities and give guidance to IWRM practitioners to also support their daily work. And this first learning journey on innovative financing is such a learning opportunity also. But of course, this very much depends also on the engagement of the practitioners and on sharing your experiences in that community. So now I'm sure that you're wondering already, how can I join this SDG 6 IWRM Community of Practice? It's a very easy 2-step process. So the community is hosted on the GWP Toolbox, which was recently relaunched, and which does not only host communities of practice, but also has a wide range of instruments and resources available, including case studies on different topics related to IWRM, including financing, but also many, many, many other topics. So you can create a profile on that GWP Toolbox. And once you have created that profile, you can join the SDG 6 IWRM community by clicking on an orange button that will appear that asks you to click to request to join. And we will approve this request as soon as possible. And as soon as this is approved, you will be a member of the SDG 6 IWRM Community of Practice and can start exchanging. So this engagement has various forms. On the Community of Practice itself, we have different tools available. So members can engage in discussions, in discussion threads on specific topics. They can share experiences, ask questions, provide inputs, comment on others' ideas. They can also share events that are relevant. They can upload resources that are relevant for the community. And of course, they can also engage directly with other members and write to them if needed. There's also an opportunity if participants don't feel very comfortable with engaging in English, there's an opportunity to actually also switch to other languages. So in this red circled illustration there, you see this button that you can click on where you can change languages. So you can actually use this community in whatever language you feel most comfortable in.